Good morning, everyone. Let's just wait one more minute, then we can kick off this session. All right, let's start. Welcome to this webinar on how accessibility will unlock and accelerate your AI transition and conversion. My name is Tim Dujardin, working as Head of Accessibility and Front-End Developer at IO. And today I'm going to change your perspective on accessibility significantly in terms of return on investment. First of all, let me introduce IO. So we are a leading digital agency in 4 key business domains in marketing, service, sales and commerce, and also product innovation. We work together with clients in various sectors such as healthcare, business, financial, transport, retail, and others. We have 12 campuses shared among 4 countries at this moment: Belgium, Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. And we have more than 2,000 experts, talents within our organization. Some practical things within this webinar. So there will be a Q&A at the end, so you can ask your questions also in the chat. The recording and the slides will be shared afterwards. And if you have any questions when this webinar is already done, send me a DM, connect on LinkedIn, or send me a mail. It's completely up to you. So let's kick off. 5 chapters I want to highlight today. So first of all, I will be starting with the state of the EAA, so the latest update in March 2026, how the market responded to the EAA based on our expertise and our cooperation with clients. Then what opportunities we think the market is still missing, followed by how do we turn those opportunities into action with our services, and then to finalize it with what's on the accessibility agenda of IO. First of all, state of the EAA in 2026, so in this month. I will be focusing on the Belgian and Dutch sites, so the Belgium and the Dutch government. In Belgium, they use a federal approach, so they have the BOSA checking the government websites and mobile apps. For the private sector and the EAA, that's the FPS economy, so the FOD economy, checking the products and services in terms of EAA. In the Netherlands, they use a sectoral approach, so not a federal, they use a sectoral approach. So for each sector, they have an authority defined, which is basically for e-commerce ACM, for financial AFM, and so forth. So if you have any questions or you're hesitating on how to make your products and documents and so forth compliant, I would advise you to connect with your authority within your context. So depending on the country, sectoral or federal. If you look at 3 aspects in terms of legislation, but specifically for the EAA, we see that the authorities are still setting up their control processes and they are still defining their priorities. Those priorities are based on the incoming complaints and also the non-conformance data that was reported to the authorities. For example, the ACM requested October last year to confirm your non-conformance or conformance data. Based on that, they will just define priorities. For example, if a lot of complaints are filed against e-commerce platforms, then chances are very high that when they start conducting audits from the authoritative side, that they will focus on e-commerce first. So those are the priorities. They are now taking time, so 1 year, 1.5 years max. They are collecting all the data to define those priorities. So they are still working on that. In terms of WCAG, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the 2.1 AA is still the legal reference for the EAA, but also for the government legislation Web Accessibility Directive. But we have seen some signals that 2.2 is already working its way to the new standard. So 2.2 became an ISO standard, meaning it's easier to use 2.2 in your national legislation if you want to focus on 2.2 rather than 2.1. Also, in terms of the W3C, you see that there are two working groups, WCAG to mobile, WCAG to ICT, that are translating those web content accessibility guidelines. So those are really web focused into a more mobile app, document, and non-web software context. And they are translating 2.2 already and not 2.1. So takeaway of this point is that if you have done an audit of your product in 2.1 AA, already start filling up the gaps to 2.2 AA, because that will be the new standard to check for. In terms of reporting, so as I've said, after 1 year, 1 and a half, we can expect some statistics and some performance in terms of the EAA, how complaints are filed, which sector is prioritized, and so forth. So that's expected Q3, so this summer. To summarize this slide, it's about progress over perfection. So in terms of authoritative side, but also in terms of your products and services, you have to commit and show progress and not show perfection. That's the most important thing. That's why you need to communicate with your authorities. If you put that EAA on a forecast, on a timeline, you will see that in June 28, of course, the EAA started. We're right in the middle of the new updates. In April or May 2026, we expect a new standard. So the first EAA legislation came into force based on the EN 301-549 version 3.2.1. So it's a little bit technical. They expect a new version of that standard, version 4.1.1, with WCAG 2.2 incorporated within 1 month or 2 months. So be prepared. For July, so for the summer, they expect the large-scale auditing because their priorities are aligned and their control processes are also set up. In terms of non-compliance, so there are some fines, of course, defined into national legislation. The most important thing is that your product, of course, can be taken off market, can lose existing market share, or can miss potential market share with not addressing the right people. Fines are really the last resort in terms of EEA compliance. So if you have received multiple remarks and you're still ignoring, objectively neglecting all the remarks that you get, you will end up with a fine. But there will be some months and years to follow on that until you have really received a fine. So basic takeaway is get into contact with your authority, ask what you're still missing, show your progress that you've already done. Because if you've done an audit and you have a statement, you can already communicate that you're investing in accessibility. So the takeaway is to communicate with your authority and to show your progress, and then you will be far off the fines that are reported within national legislation. Next to the authoritative part, so the really control organs, you also have, of course, the rights associations. So you have the disability rights, but also the human rights associations taking action. Only 9 days after the EAA in France, they saw that Auchan, Carrefour, Leclerc, and Picard-sur-Gelée were filed against because their e-commerce platform or their shopping online experience was not accessible. So they have gained some multiple remarks, and the deadline for them is September. So if you see some updates on that part in September, you can follow up on the digital disability and human rights associations. In terms of the European Accessibility Act, so you have multiple chapters. Most of the people are still focusing on one chapter specifically, the web accessibility, which is only chapter 9. You also have chapter 10, documents. You have chapter 11, software, so native software. You have chapter 8, hardware. So the European Accessibility Act overall is a lot more bigger than just focusing on the WCAG guidelines, doing an audit in that context, and communicating within your statement. So just to highlight, Chapter 9 is about WCAG. Chapter 10 is about accessible PDFs, for example. Chapter 12 is about communicating your accessibility within your statement. If you have some hardware in the showroom or in your shopping environment, you have to check chapter 8. So a lot of things are just broader than only focusing on WCAG guidelines. And an additional requirement from consumer banking. So if you're within the consumer banking sector, you have to be compliant with a reading level of maximum level B2. So be aware of that, specifically for banking, consumer banking services. but be aware that you have to comply with that extra requirement. In terms of the market's response, so that's based on our expertise, our cooperation with clients, and performing accessibility maturity growth. We see that there are two large groups. So we have on the left, we see accessible by law, just companies and product owners asking us just to make their product compliant, basically seeing legislation as a predefined endpoint. Next to that, you also have the group where we want to shift towards to is accessible by design, where the approach is make it work for everyone and win everyone's business. That's legislation as a starting point and not as an endpoint. If you look at the most ideal accessibility lifecycle, you see 5 steps. You see step 1, making or checking your compliance status with an audit, communicating in step 2 that compliance status within your accessibility statement, followed by, if you need some remediation to make sure your product is compliant, by remediation, step 3. And then you have capability building and monitoring, which are the proactive mindset steps, working towards training your people, checking procurement policies to make them updated on accessibility, investing in tooling in terms of monitoring to make sure that if you have done all the investments on accessibility and you check conformance on an automated basis, that you see that conformance is kept at the same level and not diminished. Now, if we look at the market, most of the market stops at this statement, unfortunately. So they just perform an audit, they know the status, they communicate compliance status within the statement, and they are done. But based on our experience, we see that the opportunities are within the last 3 steps. Because if you know what is reported within the audit and you remediate the issues, you are trying to understand what accessibility really is at heart, and you will see some signals and connections with other potential benefits and growth opportunities. Same for capability building. If you're training your people, they are becoming more mature and they know how to handle accessibility, and they see connections with different things, just such as geo, SEO, and so forth. So we'll discuss during this presentation. Basically, moving towards accessible by design mindset, moving away from accessible by law mindset. To summarize, accessible by law means the reactive mindset, which is just basing your accessibility approach on one single snapshot. So an audit is, of course, a snapshot and evaluation in a specific time slot. It's not a strategy. As soon as you have new content, new products, new features added to your products, your digital product, you're not incorporating accessibility because you're not aware of what you're missing on. So you have to change your reactive mindset to a proactive mindset by investing in your people, in your processes. Also invest in tooling and make sure that your product are future-proof for accessibility, but also for AI, geo, SEO, and the aging population. So you have to take advantage of the opportunities where others are ignoring opportunities because they don't know there are some opportunities to gain. Part 3, what opportunities does the market miss in terms of our perspective? So if we zoom out on the current digital scene, we see that, of course, users today expect a seamless, snappy, frustration-free online experience, regardless of their device or their contextual situation. So if you look at the online experience, you're of course not having the full picture. It doesn't start with the online experience. It starts with questions raised just as increased site findability, engagement, conversion in a difficult economic market. It looks at operational efficiency. How can we make it more efficient that the teams are working together, and also how to make sure that AI interprets our brand correctly. If you summarize all those topics, so all those questions into a grid, and we say that there's a single strategy, you probably already know what that answer is. The single strategy to improve all those pain points simultaneously is, of course, accessibility. And then I want to highlight that a lot of people not investing in accessibility, not understanding accessibility, are still lagging behind on understanding that there's a lot of connections to be made between all those topics. So that's why I wanted to have this webinar to explain all the connections with accessibility. If you split all those questions up into 3 categories, you see findability, business growth, and usability. If I start with findability, you see three topics. You see SEO, geo, and brand interpretation. So if you look at geo, at heart, it means quality of content, it means machine readability, it means AI agents and AI assistants and chatbots can interpret your content correctly. Under the hood, that means making it more machine readable because AI agents won't rely on CSS, won't rely on styling, on JavaScript. They will just rely on semantic information that they can access. And that's what I wanted to highlight AT. So most of the people in the accessibility community know AT. It stands for assistive technology. That's basically the software and hardware that people with disabilities use, also people without disabilities. But it uses the same pattern. It relies on machine readable content, meaning making your content more accessible for AT will make it also more accessible for AI and for geo. So that's step one. Step two is brand interpretation. Of course, if your content is not fully accessible, let's say you have a lot of multimedia used on your digital product and it's not provided with textual alternatives, AI agents and chatbots won't be able to index that information. So basically, it's not accessible for people with disabilities, but also not accessible for AI tooling. In the end, leading to brand misinterpretation, where you want to move away from as soon as possible. Last but not least, SEO. Of course, we know that search engines rely on different characteristics to define your ranking, semantics, meaningful quality content, also responsiveness. All those things are also incorporated into accessibility. So accessible websites, it's proven by research, they just rank higher. In the end, you can summarize the slide as accessibility accelerating findability. If I want to show some examples in terms of geo and brand interpretation, we see, for example, a telecom provider that has invested all the time to make sure that their web content is available, that their instructional video is available, and a PDF. So three types of information to make sure that, for example, someone can install their telecom cable correctly. But we have seen that web content differs from the PDF content and also differs from the instructional video. So depending on your context, your ability, you're getting different information, which is basically ending up with discrepancies between all the context that you're providing. In the end, we also saw that the video was not accessible, so there was some conversation happening, some visual text showing without adding any captions or transcript, making the video not accessible. Next to that, also the PDF was not a tagged PDF, which is basically a PDF containing screenshots without any semantic information, which is not accessible either. In the end, if someone would ask to an AI chatbot or agent, how do I prepare my telecom cable installation for that specific provider, they will end up with an incorrect answer because they are not relying on the correct instructions. Better would be to fix your video, to fix your PDF, and to fix your web content. Of course, you don't have to fix all three. In this scenario, I would advise you to fix the web content because that's the most versatile in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of findability. So making sure for the video, that means making sure adding captions and a transcript. For the PDF, making sure that it's a tagged PDF. And for the web content, making sure that the instructions within the video, the PDF, and the web content is at least aligned. In the end, the same question can be raised through an AI chatbot and agent, and then the customer can prepare his telecom cable installation efficiently. To summarize this, accessible content is about providing textual alternatives for multimedia, but also making sure your documents are tagged, so tagged PDFs, and making sure your web content has semantic, meaningful information. That will boost your AI processing because it's more machine readable, it's more structured, but also will boost your AT processing for people with disabilities. In the end, AT serves a personalized experience, and AI also does that through machine readable content. So the tailored content, the better answering and search and discovery is all triggered by more machine readable structured data. If you look at SEO, so there's a study performed by Semrush. So it's a famous company conducting SEO research. Last summer, they did a research on 10,000 websites together with accessibility checker and built with, and they showed so 5 interesting statistics. I will only be highlighting the 23% and 27% because that's the most relevant in this story. So to start with the 23%, they stated that the organic traffic increased by an average of 23% as soon as your accessibility of your website is improved. That's a logical thing because if you're using multimedia, for example, and you're providing alternative text, you're making sure that that information within multimedia is also indexed within your search and leading more organic traffic because people can look for that indexed information that wasn't available previously. Also, clear and consistent navigation works into the ranking mechanism in terms of SEO. If you have a better semantic structure, chances are higher that you're ranking higher within the search answering mechanism. Also, improved quality of content, of course. If you have large content that is made accessible, but your quality is not sufficiently providing the answer, you're still ending up with the wrong answer. So, improved quality of content is also important. In terms of organic keywords, it's a little bit the same story, but if you provide all those information within multimedia and you make it available to search for, you of course have more chance that people are reaching your website, your digital product, by providing more semantic, meaningful HTML, by providing clear naming, and of course, using clear language is also an important aspect of accessibility because a lot of people won't be looking in terms of jargon keywords, they will be looking into clear, plain language keywords. So that's a logical thing, but it's backed up by a study right now by SEMrush. In the end, conclusion of the study was that accessibility compliance boosts SEO. So it's not the only thing that it's improving SEO, but it really boosts it. But quality content is really the essential part that you have to take into account. And that's where accessibility is basically combined with the usability part. So that's quality of information, predictability, and in the end, ease of use. If we look at accessibility and usability, we focus on plain language, so better experiences are covered within providing the right context and not the complex context. So it's ranking better for SEO and geo. Also, the purposeful call to actions. If you have call to actions leading to conversion, you have to make sure that they are labeled correctly because if the action of the call to action is not clear, you end up with friction and frustration at the end user side. Last but not least, accessible forms. If you're collecting data, that's one of the most important things to convert your product. Collecting data and not providing concrete evaluation, validation, and clear instructions, you're ending up with misinformation or people even not filling in your form and you not collecting data. So it's a big return on investment that you're not considering right now. So accessibility, to summarize, boosts usability within those three topics. Also a little bit backed up by a study. So Shopping Tomorrow study as a study in the Netherlands performed by e-commerce experts on a yearly basis. And they stated that, or they saw based on their research, that 81% of consumers abandoned their checkout when they hit an accessibility issue. So those consumers are not specifically people with disabilities, they're just overall consumers. As soon as they hit barriers, they will abandon your checkout. Next to that, 82% of the consumers experience frustration. Of course, if you can't fill in a form, if you can't complete your purchase flow, for example, you end up frustrated and you end up perhaps calling customer service, but just perhaps also moving towards another company. So be aware of the bounce rates and the positive impact of accessibility, reducing those bounce rates. Last but not least, business growth. Of course, you have operational efficiency, engagement conversion, and of course, handling the current difficult, saturated economic market. In terms of business growth, so for operational efficiency, we see reduced pressure on customer service. We see lower rework costs. For engagement, we see removing friction, building customer empathy and trust. And for the difficult economic market on the short term, see, of course, the market share you're currently not addressing. And in the long term, also preparing for accessibility demand that will increasingly grow by 2050. To start with operational efficiency, so reducing pressure on your customer service. It's a statement based on research of Nucleus. So it's a study performed on people who are blind. They interviewed very in-depth those people, and they saw that 90% of the interviewees were calling customer service multiple times per week. So you can imagine it's only focusing on blind people. If you put that on an overall consumer perspective, a lot of impact, a lot of load on the customer service just because your product is not accessible and not usable. And of course, they call your customer service, but you're not sure that they will continue the transaction. Most of the people will just abandon the transaction overall. So that's a high cost without any return on investment. Next to that, also something called shifting accessibility left. A lot of people within the accessible by law mindset are still performing just audits within the production environment and fixing all the issues that were reported within that audit. Basically meaning you have to move all the way back to the design, development, and testing phase to fix all those issues, ending up with a 30 times higher cost than you should be performing accessibility. So a lot of people say accessibility expensive because they are not handling it the correct way. The correct way through capability building would be to add check-ins within the design phase as early as possible, so shifting accessibility left on the timeline, because most of the issues originate in the design phase. 67%, even backed up by research, of accessibility issues can be tackled there. So you can imagine that the cost is very low in design phase to change something instead of in production phase. For engagement and conversion, of course, if you remove friction, you will lift engagement, because if you have, for example, a purchase flow that is not made accessible, they can't complete their purchase. You will create a silent drop-off if you're not tracking. If you're tracking, perhaps you can see it in the bounce rates. If you're not tracking, you are losing consumers you were never knew you were losing. So it's important to fix that friction, to make your product more usable, more accessible, and then the conversion will improve across the board. That's the usability part. For accessibility is, of course, building empathy and trust, is showing that you care, showing universality, and showing professionalism. And that's where accessibility is really close attached to universal standards, not making complex mechanisms that need extra instructions for people to understand. So keeping your product close to universal standards, make it recognizable, make it predictable. And then in the end, in a crowded market, that perception will move towards better conversion. And of course, those people that convert are also recommending your product to other people. So the impact is quite huge. Last but not least, difficult economic market. So in the short term, of course, you have some statistics in the Belgian population, but also in the Dutch population. For the Belgian population, 25% of people within the population have a disability. So that's 3 million people. There's also the aspect of digital vulnerability. 4.4 million people in Belgium, or 40%, are having low or no digital skills. So focusing on accessibility facilitates those two groups. Of course, there's some overlap between them, those two groups, to use a product efficiently. So you end up with a potential expanded customer base. Same for the Netherlands, but different numbers. In the Netherlands, it's 1 in 3 people having a disability, and Belgium 1 in 4. So that ends up with 5.8 million people with a disability in the Netherlands and 4.9 million people in the Netherlands who are digitally vulnerable. Same argument, the potential expanded customer base is something you want to invest in because of the saturated, difficult economic market at this moment. So you have to find those edges to improve your product and to stand out against the competition. Of course, next to digital vulnerability and people who are disabled, it's also about people in the end. They're someone's parent, colleague, friend, partner. So they influence all the people around them. So it's not something you should underestimate. They are not a target group. They are just human beings also talking to other human beings. And of course, you can ask yourself, if you're coming to IO and you're asking to develop a product or a service, and we say, okay, we can build it, but 1 in 4 people in Belgium and 1 in 3 people in the Netherlands won't be able to use it, I don't think you will be convinced to work together with us. So be aware of that. Last but not least, in terms of business growth, of course, there's something in terms of healthcare. There's an improved healthcare in the EU, but also worldwide. They stated in the World Health Organization that 1 in 5 people will be 60 years of 60 years of age by 2050. So aging brings, of course, extra requirements for accessibility accommodation or accommodation overall. So if you look at the graph on the left, you see a lot of gray and light blue. By 2050, that will be higher in the dark blue, which is basically more people that are older than 60 years old, especially if you focus on the Europe part of this graph. So I want to conclude this part by moving your perspective from accessibility in terms of a cost, a legal burden, to the perspective of accessibility as an opportunity or even opportunities. And that's why I think the EAA, but also the Web Accessibility Directive for government, it forces you to get started, not to end there. It forces you to get started, and then the market will, of course, reward you if you keep going and you invest in accessibility. Now, how do we translate those opportunities into action at IO? So we have 6 types of services. We have a training service, which provides training based on the capabilities that you need. We conduct usability tests based on people with or without disabilities. We help you define the correct and concrete compliance program. So compliance here doesn't only mean doing an audit and performing a statement. It also means that you have to check your national legislation. If your product is hosted in France or in the Netherlands, it's a different context of the EAA. So we have legal experts helping you defining compliance programs and also helping you with procurement policies, because if you're using external services, for example, you have a purchase flow and you use an external payment provider, if that payment provider is not providing a service in an accessible way, you still end up without conversion, without purchasing the product. So you have to make sure that if you procure external services, that you have some contractual agreements and policies instead. And of course, we can also help with accessibility statement composition to make sure that compliance program is finalized. We also do auditing together with some AI-infused services. So we help evaluating your product and your compliance status. We have a lot of experts in terms of design, web, app, and document accessibility. So we can help you with hands-on, efficient technical remediation. And last but not least, we can help you with building and enriching your processes, people, information, and technology with accessibility to prevent issues from occurring again and again, and to prevent your conformance and usability, accessibility, findability to diminish over time. In terms of auditing, so we perform 4 types of audits. We have web, PDF, design, and native app accessibility audits. Right, because we have the different chapters within legislation, so web accessibility, documents, software, and so forth. So we want to tap into those chapters by providing different auditing services. We also use AI agents to propose a dashboard based on the audit reports that we create with our auditors. We want to categorize all those issues to make it more tangible, to understand the issues and where the priorities lie. So for example, we have categorization for development, design, and web mastering. In this case, there was 22% of web mastering issues that were impacting accessibility on a negative way. So that's why we invested and we trained those people with our web mastering training to reduce that percentage. So our training programs are 3 training programs. We have accessible development training, full day. We have accessible design training, a full day. And we have accessible content creation training, which is basically helping your webmasters and your document authors to make accessible PDFs, but also to use the CMS, for example, efficiently and in an accessible way. Last part, what's on the accessibility agenda next? So we have in June, we have an event in Rotterdam, Leaving No One Behind in a Digital World, together with our partners Digidroom and Close the Gap and ICT Media. We're having a debate on how we can work together to reduce the digital divide overall. So feel free to join. It's open for everyone. And then I would like to end this webinar with a message that we have to build the web for humans and for agents, but we have to do it together to understand that we have to address all the humans and we have to address agents, but also AI chatbots. And I truly believe that accessibility is the missing connection that a lot of people, a lot of business owners and product owners are missing. So in my point of view, accessibility time is now. If you want to grow your business together with us, you can always contact us at accessibility@iodigital.com, or you can also send me a mail to my personal email address. So thank you, and if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. So first question, which government body is responsible for checking whether your digital channels meet the minimum accessibility requirements, and is there a fine if you do not meet the minimum requirements? So as I've stated, within Belgium, you have the federal approach, so there's the FOT or FPS economy, checking everything in terms of EAA compliance. If you're not compliant, the first thing that they will do is send you a remark and have discussed with you a deadline to make sure that accessibility is within your governance. If you're neglecting that multiple times, so they will send multiple remarks. If you neglect that multiple times, you will end up risking a fine. But that's really, really the last resort. They don't want to focus on fines. They want to focus on accessibility progress and making a product more universal available. In terms of the Netherlands, of course, you have to check with your sector. In e-commerce, for example, that's ACM, checking your accessibility requirements. And of course, the fines are defined in national Dutch legislation. Question of Natalie, do you know when the event in June will be? We're still checking with Markham the defined date, so we'll definitely communicate the finalized date. It's just not finished already, so we have to check up what the date is currently. Also, a sign-up page will be available at our iodigital.com website, so we will share that through our social channels. A question of Danielle, does IO do audits according RegEc EM, and when is it obligated to audit for 2.2? We indeed, so 2 years ago, we started our auditing service based on RegEc 2.2 using the RegEc EM standard, so the evaluation methodology of RegEc itself, so W3C. So all our audits are already the last 2 years focusing on 2.2 AA compliance. So if you have done an audit together with us, you're already fine for the upcoming months. The obligation for the 2.2 audit is not really concrete in legislation right now. It's expected in April or May this year. It's not defined exactly, but to highlight, 2.2 is also backwards compatible with 2.1. So the best approach is to evaluate against 2.2, because if you're compliant with 2.2, you're also compliant with 2.1, which is not the fact in the other way around. So if you want to invest in audits, do 2.2 to make sure that you're future-proof. A question of Jeroen, are there any sites or apps which can check PDFs if they are compliant? PDFs is a very complex matter. In fact, you have to invest, and that's why we do the training, invest in proactively changing how you export your Word documents into PDFs. That's the biggest advantage. The other way is to fix PDFs retroactively, but that's an Acrobat Reader Pro. There are some tools, I've not tested them. We have to just fix it within Acrobat Pro. They have some built-in accessibility checkers within the Adobe suite, so we can use them to make sure that PDFs are accessible. So we are covering that in our accessible content creation training. Question of Branko, is there a difference for PDFs for e-commerce that are used in B2B and B2C, or do the same rules apply? In terms of Accessibility legislation is, of course, the focus B2C at this moment. It's not focused on B2B. Of course, you can ask yourself the question, B2B, it's also backed up by a business owner, which is still a human being. But I think they focused on B2C to prioritize and to keep it a little bit more tangible, because if they combine B2B and B2C consumer products and services, it will be very hard to evaluate. So I think priority is B2C, and then they will shift towards B2B. And the same rules apply. It doesn't matter if your PDF is in e-commerce or in banking, the same rules apply. It's only a matter of if you're using the PDF in your digital product or your digital service, then it has to be accessible. For example, signing a contract, of course, everyone should be able to read that contract and to sign that contract. So that's the logic behind making it accessible for everyone. A question of rule. You mentioned AI-based accessibility tooling developed in-house. Is this available to the public, or is there more information available about it? Currently, it's only our internal approach that is AI-based, so there's nothing publicly available. But if some people or some companies are interested, that we can definitely tap into that interest. Currently, it's only the internal way of working. Any other questions? No. Of course, you can always ask your questions in the accessibility@iodigital.com, but also send me a mail or a DM or connect on LinkedIn. So then I would like to thank everyone, and then we can close off this webinar for today. Thank you.